So let's talk about alternative dispute resolution. And, one thing for sure is that, as a general rule, 95% or more of the lawsuits filed. So this is even lawsuits filed settled prior to the completion of the litigation process. And think about that, think of how many disputes get settled before lawsuits even file. It's many, 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 many more. And so, 99, I could probably say fairly confidently that better than 99% of all disputes get settled, prior to any kind of litigation happening. And that's just kind of natural, right? We have a tendency to want to settle disputes outside of the court of law. So, what happens? Well, conflicts leads to disputes when one party makes claim, yet others deny. And sometimes these are innocent enough. Sometimes they just happen, something's not written quite correctly, or there's two different ways to interpret how it was written. Those types of things happen quite easily, quite honestly, quite innocently, and yet it can turn into disputes, right? So negotiations, the process used to persuade or coerce someone to do what you want them to do. Me and my salty language, Types of negotiations, right? You can be positional. Parties state opinions. It's competitive. It involves some give and take, and it's principled. I don't know if you would call Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, if this is positional negotiations. I don't know. I don't think they've gotten to the negotiation part yet. They haven't gotten past the name calling yet. But a lot of negotiations kind of start this way, where we we stake out our side. We say, by golly, we want a $15 raise, and that's all we're going to accept. Okay. And then, the management, of course, says, well, we're only going to give you a $10 raise, take it or leave it, right? And then you negotiate, and hopefully you come up with something in the middle, right? Which we would call the zone of agreement. And sometimes there is no zone of agreement, and we end up having strikes, or we end up having disputes, or it ends up, depending on contract law or those types of things, might end up going to a court of law. So we can also have principled negotiations, right, which aren't positional. And oftentimes what happens here is there's a relationship, and we want to keep that relationship going, and we want to keep it positive, and we have a subject that's in the best interests of both parties. Maybe in a national or international sense, you might look at some of our trade negotiations, right? Both sides have a real interest in having free trade between the nations, with some exceptions, of course, and so you kind of stake that out. You don't really stake it out. I guess that'd be the opposite. You don't stake it out. You have a mutual interest, and you're trying to come to an agreeable solution to that mutual interest. So why do we have alternative dispute resolution systems, or what are those alternatives, or ADRs? And from the most to the least expensive in terms of time, cost, emotions, and all those things. Of course, the most expensive is if we go all the way to trial and appeal, and the least is when we have a negotiated settlement. And again, probably 95% of all things are negotiated settlements, and then even when there is a lawsuit filed, those end up being settled before the lawsuit goes to to the end. Some of these in between, mediation and arbitration are the two we'll probably talk about most. Mock trial and mini trial, not something that I'm keenly aware of here in Montana. I don't know that those happen here in the state of Montana. They do, I'm sure, other places. We'll kind of give some examples. But, okay, so why do we settle without litigation? One is, of course, cost. It's expensive. To go to court is very, very expensive. And depending on the amount in dispute, it can be crazy. And believe me, in banking, I saw some cases I saw divorce cases that were like that, where, the couple only had $5,000 between them, and they'd each pay $10,000 to an attorney to fight over that $5,000. It was the goofiest thing sometimes. And, well, it was all about principle according to each side, but oh well. So what are some of the personal reasons, right? It's instinctive. We normally like to compromise. We don't like trouble. We're concerned about the opinion of others, right? Court cases are very public. Okay? Even civil cases are very, very public. They're available. They happen in a court of law. And unless it involves something of which I'm not aware, they're filed and they're held in the court of law, and everybody has access to it. They get to see that. And so, you may be concerned about others' opinions from a personal reason. And then from a business reason, of course, it can be bad for business to be sued. It can be a bad appearance, right? To sue can be bad as well. Okay, and then of course you always worry about sympathetic juries. Certainly big businesses do, or deep pockets do. You worry about the jury that's going to side with the small guy, the poor outside guy. This lists some of these in about $5 billion, but some of the bank settlements that have been recent have dwarfed this. They've been in the $15 billion, I want to think, maybe even $20 billion range, and those go back coming from the financial crisis that we had 2007 through 2009. There's some huge settlements that took place with Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup. Paid big dollars in settlements that were far bigger than these here. So let's stop there, and we'll come back, and then we'll start talking about arbitration.